I have been coming to Bon Echo Provincial Park since 1991. On May 21, 2022, a powerful Derecho storm tore across Ontario and hit the park, leaving a trail of destruction throughout the region. In the next few clips I will show before and after views of several campsites where I stayed over the years, revealing just how dramatically the landscape has changed.
August 2nd, 2021, Bon Echo Provincial Park in Ontario, and this is my campsite, 436. I've been camping here since July 27th, 2021. There were some other people with me, but they left yesterday, so this is my last night, and tomorrow I am heading to Toronto.
Sometimes the weather wasn't perfect, but when you're camping, you can't expect everything to go your way. Fortunately, we had excellent waterproof tents and a large tarp that gave us reliable shelter from the rain. We stayed dry, comfortable, and able to enjoy our time in the park. Campsite number 436 was quite pleasant. It was surrounded by trees and bushes and offered plenty of shade throughout the day. I would not hesitate to camp on it in the future. But the future turned out to be far more unpredictable than anyone expected. When I returned to this campsite after the 2022 Derecho storm, I could hardly believe what I was seeing. For a moment, I honestly thought I had come to the wrong place. The landscape looked so different that it was almost impossible to recognize. Trees that had stood here for decades had suddenly disappeared, and the entire character of the campsite had changed.
I am still at Bon Echo Provincial Park, campsite 436. I cannot believe what has happened to this campsite since 2021. I used to camp here with Guy and Patricia 3 years ago, and this campsite was totally different. It was absolutely totally forested, full of shade, of course, and where you see the tent, it was probably, well, I wouldn't say maybe a middle, but there was a lot of space where the bushes are right now. So anyway, because of the storm, almost no trees survived, and the campsite has no shade, nothing. And the next campsite, 437, that's even more interesting. Actually, I met here Ravi. He used to stay with his family, and he even complained because he had to walk like, I would say 30 meters maybe. So he had to walk to his campsite for around like probably a minute, like 30 meters. And actually the campsite itself used to be somewhere down there. We cannot even see. Obviously the park has changed since then, the setup of the campsite. So now the campsite is here. It's been relocated very close to the road. It used to be probably like a parking lot for his car. So now if he came here, I could tell him, well, don't worry, you won't have to do any walking, but obviously you will have no privacy, you will have no shade, you will have no trees, nothing. So unfortunately, it's not a very appealing campsite anymore. But in any way, let's just take a look at all the clearing, which is almost surrealistic, like bizarre to see, because I would never ever expect this to happen to this park 3 years ago in May 2021.
I camped on this site in 2021. It was private, secluded, pleasantly shaded. And yes, a little buggy. But I loved it. During that stay, I discovered a small bird's nest nearby, with 3 hermit thrush chicks. Every day I watched them grow. And eventually I even recorded a short video of them, which I later posted on YouTube. In fact, I had already reserved this same campsite again for 2022, but after the powerful Derecho storm struck in May, this entire section of the park had to be closed for safety reasons. The damage was extensive, and the area remained inaccessible for more than 2 years. The next video will show what this campsite looked like after the storm, and how dramatically it had changed.
This is campsite number 495 in Boneka Provincial Park. I camped on this campsite in 2021, 3 years ago. And of course in 2022 there was a big storm. I cannot recognize this campsite. In fact, it has been totally moved because 3 years ago, where I am walking right now, there wasn't any fire pit. Actually, it was a driveway, so I used to drive probably up to here with my car. And the campsite was over here. So, yeah, I was sitting around here. There was a fire pit just over here, and my tent was exactly here. It was my new Eureka tent. I made a video. Now, if we look around, it's unbelievable. I cannot recognize this campsite because of the felled trees. So I can imagine all the damage, although it is not as huge as at other campsites, but still this area doesn't look very pretty. And there used to be a bird nest with 3 chicks. The bird was called the hermit thrush, I believe, so I used to observe it. I used to sit here. But in any case, this is now a very different campsite, and they basically moved this campsite very close to the road. It used to be very private, very secluded. Not anymore. I would never like to camp on this campsite anyway.
I first camped on this site in 2002, and returned here at least 4 more times over the years. Because the campsite borders a swampy area, you might expect a fair number of mosquitoes, but that never bothered me very much. One night in 2002, while I was camping here alone, a black bear wandered into my campsite around midnight. To this day, I still don't know who was more frightened, the bear or me. Over the years, I also noticed that a few trees were cut down by park staff, most likely because they had become diseased or unsafe. Otherwise, this campsite has remained remarkably similar to the way I remember it from that first visit in 2002. I was quite curious if and how this campsite was affected by the 2022 storm. I managed to book it in July 2025 and was able to find out. Let's watch the next clip.
It is July 30th, 2025. I am in Boneco Provincial Park on campsite 488. I camped on this campsite for the first time in 2002, 23 years ago, unbelievable, with Mr. Tad Pasek. And also in 2010 and 2018. In 2010 with a meetup group, there were like 30 of us in this park. Anyway, 3 years ago in May of 2022, a big storm went through this park, especially through this area. And you can see this clearing. It wasn't like that. It was a totally forested area. This campsite, for example, 489, I could hardly see anything. It was totally forested. And this is our campsite, which, to be honest, is kind of intact because most of the trees are still here. Although, for example, this area, this clearing, it wasn't here. Instead of this clearing, there were plenty of trees, and that's why before we couldn't even see any other campsites. Now we can. However, other campsites in the park have changed 100%. Basically 100% of the trees are gone now, and there's no shade, so we are still enjoying plenty of shade and plenty of trees. When I was camping on this campsite in 2002, there were 2 trees here, and I remember I used to sit under those trees. Unfortunately, they must have been cut before the storm, because when I was here in 2018, they had already been gone. But otherwise, this area hasn't changed much. Although I think at least 1 tree is gone. And I believe the fire pit has been moved since then a little bit. But yeah, but otherwise, yeah, everything is more or less the same. This campsite is quite nice because it is surrounded by, well, I would say maybe not swamps, but marshes. Some people are afraid that because of those marshes there are going to be mosquitoes, but this year we haven't had too much problems with mosquitoes. And yeah, and this is that area. Which, to be honest, it doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I like it because it gives me a lot of privacy. But I remember that in the 90s there was one family that actually stayed here, and I think I talked to them and they said, yeah, because mosquitoes are very bad. So otherwise, yeah, so it's a nice campsite. Yeah, this year I can see just in front of me another campsite. Before it was impossible to see that campsite. And I can see this one and another one, so I can see at least 3 campsites here. And before the storm, we were totally sheltered from our neighbors. There are plenty of raspberry bushes right now. I don't remember if they were here before, but probably because the trees are gone now, other vegetation takes over, and I've noticed that at other campsites as well. Plenty of other vegetation is already growing. I wonder if this area will have any trees in like 30 or 40 years. Maybe not. And yeah, this is the other campsite over here. I think this campsite has changed a lot because, again, I remember this campsite, it was totally forested. Now it's very open. In fact, I wouldn't like camping over here because in the morning, like 6 o'clock in the morning, you almost have to wake up because of the sun. It's getting very hot. Yeah, so this campsite, yeah, is very open now. All the trees are gone. And this is the road leading from campsite 487. I remember, of course, this area quite well. I even remember this rock. It's kind of split in half a little bit. And again, this area everywhere was totally forested. So this section was actually closed in 2022 after the storm in May, and it was totally closed in 2022, 2023, and reopened in the second half of the season last year, 2024. So it basically took almost, I would say, 3 years to get rid of all the fallen trees, and probably some trees had to be cut down because they were really unsafe. So yeah, once again, let me just take a look at this area. I can hardly believe that there have been so many changes, but well, nature is unpredictable, and well, I'm just glad we didn't have any fire, because probably fire would have been much more devastating than just a storm.
In August 1992, Chris and I spent over 2 weeks camping on campsite number 462. It was an awesome spot, very forested, secluded, private, and very shady. And it was very spacious. We had no problem finding room for all our camping equipment. During the day we played with always hungry and very friendly chipmunks, who became our constant companion. At night a lot of raccoons paid us regular visits, and if anything edible was left outside, it was gone in no time. Once we saw well over 20 raccoons at our campsite. A family staying on the adjacent campsite got so scared of them that they left the next day. In 1994, we again decided to stay on the same campsite for almost 3 weeks. And in 1999, I spent another week on campsite 462 with Tad. While camping in Bon Echo in 2017, I revisited this campsite. It had not changed much, and certainly, the rock at its entrance was still there, preventing recreational vehicles and campers from using the campsite. Tents were welcome. In 1993, we camped on the adjacent campsite, number 461, which was probably as good as 462, private, spacious, full of trees and vegetation, and shady. The first photo was taken in 1993, the next one in 2002, and the last two in 2017. During my July 2025 visit to Bon Echo Park, I made 2 videos showing the campsites after the May 2022 devastating Derecho storm. I was absolutely shocked at what I saw.
I am at Bon Echo Provincial Park, July 29th, 2025. What we see is something very, very shocking, at least to me, because this campsite 462 is the first campsite, or actually the second time I came to Bon Echo in 1992 with Chris, and we used to camp here. The difference is this campsite was totally forested. I cannot recognize it because of the storm that took place over here on, I believe, May 21st or 22nd, 2022. So over here we used to park our car, and the campsite, our campsite really where we set up the tents, was actually somewhere here in this bush. Because of the storm, they had to cut down all the trees, and they basically relocated the campsite very close to the road. So again, this is shocking. And I remember also just across the campsite, this area used to be totally forested. There were plenty of trees. So now, because the trees are gone and all the shade is gone, the new vegetation takes over, and it's really thriving, I believe. Now let's move to the other campsite, 461. Campsite 461, we camped here in 1993, and again it was like a totally private forested campsite, and just where the campsite is today, it used to be like a parking, and the campsite itself was again over there when the bushes. Now they've already changed everything. So yeah, well, we can just see there are some bushes, totally new vegetations. Almost all the trees are gone. Very few trees are remaining. In fact, it was on this very campsite when I quit smoking, I remember, in 1993. And the area just across the campsite, it used to be very dense forest. Now it's like a one big clearing, and it's really hard for me to believe still. So I don't know if anybody, I don't think there was anybody hurt, but I think there were some injuries during that storm. I can imagine it must have been absolutely horrible. It's one more panoramic view of campsite 461, and just across campsite 460. And let's go towards campsite 462. Yeah, campsite 462 again. I find it almost unreal. Of course, we could never see any neighbors at that time. Now it's like an open area, no shade. I would never like to stay on this campsite. I would be probably suffocating at 6 in the morning because of the sun. And campsite for 63. I remember it was not the greatest one because of the bathroom over here, but still it was a very nice shady campsite. Well, not anymore.
Bon Echo has always been a place of rare beauty and quiet majesty. The great storm of 2022, though powerful and destructive, is only a brief moment in the long story of this ancient landscape. Forests fall, and forests grow again. Seasons pass, and time continues its patient work. And one can only hope that thousands of years from now, this remarkable place will still endure, wild, timeless, and magnificent.